question for you. Well, if we think about journalists or people working in the media, how do these people understand, consider the fact that players or sports persons are being recruited as consultants? Well, good evening to you all. The evolution of consultant is quite an important issue, so we do like my Canadian friend very quickly the history of this. I think Bradejo was the first consultant in TV channels because Roger Couder at the time was the most important commentator for football rugby, and he was using a specific term and said, go young guys, and said, go young guys, until there was actually the trial being made in rugby. So Mr. Rejo was there for 2 reasons, just to provide some technical skills in terms of football rugby. He was also there to say that he loved Roger, and he was also supporting him when he was supporting the young girls. So there was a lot of benevolence between the legacy commentator and the legend commentator, Mr. Roger Couder. So I imagine that the hockey commentator was the Roger Couder of the Quebec in this kind, but unfortunately the evolution of the consultant has been quite important. I will not tell you all the history, but right now the consultant is the Kleenex consultant, the one we use because he is or she is famous. So we won't try to know whether it will be a good couple with the journalist. The idea being that it should be a team, a work team. There should be a complementarity between the journalist and the former high-level sports person, athlete. I've been working with Stéphane Dagana, and it was working very well. On the 25th of October, I will be commenting a football match of the Football League, and that will be quite fun. Actually, that will be in Tournante. So I will be commenting this with the consultant. I don't know at all. So I was said, well, you will be working with that guy, so maybe he's great, but I do not know him. So we'll see. I'll be discovering him in Tours. When I arrive in Tours, I'll be shake hands after the match, and that's it. Really, that's the way it's going to work. So this idea of having consultants in TV channel has changed. It has also changed since we're not asking consultants to be only technical, to have only technical skills in the play, but we also ask them to bring controversies. That has also to do with the access right. We have to put something before and after the match. So we must have people who have something to say when it comes to pay for TV channels, but also in the channels we do not have the broadcasting rights. I would say that the consultant role has changed, and it is now quite complex, quite complicated, quite tricky, really. I think that today sports people are being used in the different forms, and what I've just seen on Twitter is quite revealing, really. We're asking athletes to do things they're not a trend for, they're not a specialist really in. So thank you. So I want to apologize. I did not introduce the different professionals who are here, so we'll ask them to introduce themselves. Good evening. My name is Romane Enguehard. I'm 18 years old. I play football at USMLO in second division, second league. I'm in second year of sport university, and I've been selected at the national level in the football team. My name is Marion Le Couls. I'm in charge of communication for Fortunéo at the cycling team in world second division. It's one of the in the top 5 cycling team in France. So I'm in charge of communication with the press, but also produce some video content. And I also support all our partners when they want to promote cycling. Good evening, my name is Mathilde. I'm 21 years old. and I am a freelancer at France Télévisions. I'm also a photographer, and I've spent 3 years in Lannion, where I graduated from the IUT and had a bachelor degree here at the IUT of Lannion. Do you want to comment on what Patrick has just said? What has been said is quite interesting, I think. It is true that social networks fed by athletes are interesting. It provided some other kind of information. We talked about Twitter and Facebook, but I think Snapchat is used very much. I think you use it for your private life, but you can see that in the next coming years, you will know more of the athletes thanks to Snapchat if they integrate you in their network. If you can follow their accounts, for instance, an athlete can have an injury and it can actually tell about his injury, post a story because he is at hospital and he's really disgusted because he couldn't actually play a match. So that may not be broadcasted in the mainstream media. So maybe it's a good way actually to get some quite interesting and relevant information about the athletes you wouldn't get otherwise. Just to come back to the point, the main point mentioned by Boris, the relationship between the athletes, their clubs, the media. What is the situation in the French football team? Are you aware of your public image management? Are you made aware and are you trained about the public management image? When we are selected, there are times during which we are trained with media trainers. They provide us with advice pertaining to the press releases we can make, the posts on the social media we can post. So there is a time to talk about this indeed. So from the club point of view and from the employees, the staff of the clubs who manage the team, of course, football club is a professional businesses, such as a cycling team. Are the players monitored? Do you actually monitor or watch the Facebook or Twitter accounts of the cyclists? Yes, we are monitoring quite closely the cyclist accounts. So yes, that is important. And if there is any problem, we provide them with some feedback. In our team, we do not have many athletes who post tweets. I know that in some teams, they forbid people to tweet after an hour after the race. But we actually want to promote them to tweet. So we have a rather different approach. So we are there really to promote people to tweet, to post tweet, and to create a dynamic. So I thought about the race which took place in the Velodrome of Marseille, and we had a cyclist who was a fan of Marseille. So we did a communication promotion event in Marseille. We got a shirt from the Football Marseille Club, and we did a small funny video with the cyclist wearing that fan shirt, and we posted that on Twitter, and we had a huge instant buzz, and we knew that the cyclist would cycle with the football team shirt of Marseille, and we had a lot of feedback. Even though he ranked 80 actually in the competition. So I hope he's not watching me, but thanks to such short and small communication actions, the cyclists are becoming aware of the Twitter network and their trend to use that network. And of course, we posted also another tweet with the Fortunéo shirt, and that worked very well. But it's even better when they come to ask us for some advice. But I think it's important to provide an impetus. Do you want to provide some feedback about what was said previously? There are any questions? We would be happy to respond to those questions. I will give the mic now. A question? The first one is the hardest one. Beatrice, maybe you may have a question. I just wanted to know with the social networks, we do know that the relationship between the communicators and the journalist is a collaboration one, but also we need to have a kind of distance. How can we do in order to have the right distance when we stage people, things on the social networks, which are usually staged in the intimacy? How can we... Could you be more precise about the advice we provide in the staging on oneself so that the athletes can use the social networks? Are there any rules pertaining to the things that can be done or cannot be done, do's and don'ts? Not really advices, really. Well, especially in cycling, people become professional quite late when they're 21 or 22 years old. So they have an experience that the football players do not have. In the football environment, they're much more limited, really. And then the communication advisor are needed to train the cyclists, to provide them with information, with do's and don'ts. We've got 23 cyclists, so I'm here for the sake of the team, but I'm not behind in every cyclist watching what they do all the time. So I am here for the benefit of the team as a whole. So some cyclists do not know how to use that tool, which is Twitter. So we just provide them with practical advice. I'm thinking about an example where we advise the cyclists. I'll be thinking about it, but I don't know. Well, it is true that you support the cyclists who are not used to use social networks, but there are young athletes who use social networks much more. And some athletes do a lot of buzz on the social networks, but they do not realize that when they do sign a professional contract, they are public characters, and therefore there must be an example for young people. They remember a cyclist, for the AG2R team, and he posted a very strange picture from a snowman, which was really quirky, really, and therefore the PR person of the team asked that athlete, that cyclist, to remove that very quirky snowman picture. That was not just on. Just a question about the different terms, level of language, and the level of language of high-level athletes which are stigmatized, because those athletes communicate in different ways according to the situation they encounter. But I think what is important is to convey the information and to be understood. But if we refer to the Quebecan model, Canadian model, where people are eager to spot spelling mistakes, it seems that in France that people are more tolerant on that respect when it comes to spelling mistakes or typos. So is the level of language literacy of the expression is important in terms of good practices of communication, journalism. So are you, the young generation, careful about this, not making spelling mistakes, typos, using good grammar? What do you mean by level of language? The way that people express or the actual content? Well, the way people speak, well, you cannot ask, you cannot request. That is not linked. I do not think that the level of language is one thing, and one must never forget that we are dealing here with young people who have not graduated from college, who started at a very early age a high-level sport and competition, and they have to respond to the requests and demands of the sponsors, and sometimes the sponsors actually forbid them to express themselves as they would like to. So I think we cannot reproach them to use the level of language. I mean, the language they use usually with their friends. But what I do not like in the social network, and the importance of a social network, is the fact that it is really pure emptiness, a void, really, emptiness. I haven't subscribed to anything because I think it's nothing. Okay, maybe it's friendly, sometimes it can make you smile, but when it comes to information, there's nothing, really. It's just poor, it's null. Really? So, okay, well, the guy says, well, he's disgusted, he's not happy because he couldn't play the match. Okay, I can understand that, but is it really interesting? Really, I don't care. I could have said the same thing, I was sick, so I couldn't come today, but is that really interesting? But I would have been interested in having the opinion of the footballers mentioned by Boris, and I would have liked to know their opinion on the different problems faced by professional football, even with urban language, really, and using slangs. I would have liked to have their viewpoint when it comes to the financial problems that professional football is facing. And I think that would have been interesting in that case, really. In the presentation made by Boris, I noted that the sole tweet, which I thought was quite striking, was the one made by the athlete, who referred to a magazine in Arte, saying, well, look on the TV drama or the magazine on Arte because it's great. He only had one retweet, but if you say, fucking hell, I'm disgusted because I couldn't work, but you will have 1,000 tweets or retweets. So I do not agree with that. So I'm not bothered really with the language itself, the level of language, but I have a problem with the contents. But if you widen the scope, I think the language used by the journalist is an issue. I think there may be an interaction. Do you think the journalists do not speak well, do not express themselves? I'm not very critical, but I think things have changed. The way journalists speak, yes, French language has changed. I'm not critical, really. Well, French language or other languages also have changed. Maybe that a young journalist would say, well, I'm disgusted, really, our use of a slang, maybe Pierre Ménez would do so. I'm not shocked about it because language is a living matter, really. It is evolving constantly. But I'm really concerned by this nothing, this emptiness, which is conveyed by the social network. I mean, is it really interesting to post on a social network, look, I'm sick, I'm disgusted by the fact I couldn't play tonight? Is that really important? I'm not sure. I just want to comment on this in order to be very practical and to refer back to the example of the professional footballers. Where is a professional footballer? Where is he in the room? Maybe we could ask him his opinion. Do you want to come? Do you want to come? Yes, please come. Okay, come to the stage. No? No. I think maybe we could ask that question. Well, there are short-term contracts in the football industry, and the amounts can be huge, the salaries can be huge, so it could be a risk, a real hazard to take a political stand, really, and to express their political opinions. But I think not all players are equal when it comes to expressing their position. I think the one who can express themselves freely are maybe the most wealthy. So you say there is some kind of censorship in the expression. Well, I think yes. So why shall we express ourselves, say what we think, if there is some censorship? Well, sport is actually quite precarious, even for people can pay a lot of time. There are some huge risk on them, but not judging them. There is a lack of taking a stand, a lack of expressing your opinion must be reframed in that general context. It's only the fact that people communicate. Well, those social networks are used to communicate. The guy who doesn't want to communicate will not use a social network. He doesn't have to open a Twitter account. If he opens a Twitter account, that means he needs to say things to the society at large. So that's why I am bothered. If that guy needs to say some things, well, okay, he can say them. He doesn't have to talk about politics. I think, okay, he wants to tell about the thing that matters to him as a citizen, as a person. But I would like to know what a footballer, which I like, thinks about a number of things, is interested in. If the social networks can be only used to say, okay, you're great, I hope you will be there for the football match, he doesn't need to say that, I do know that. Now, if he thinks that he does not need to do some PR, that's fine, okay, I respect that. But if you open an account to say nothing, I'm really frightened by this emptiness, this nothing which is being promoted. And I think the more we communicate, are we not alone? If we communicate much more, I think we are managing the hyper solitude with those tools, where people use the tools to talk about nothing and to say nothing, really. I think we just need to make a call right now. Is that right? Can we continue? Is that okay? Okay, so you were wondering, I was wondering about the interest of Twitter. What happens if you do not use Twitter? So what happens? If you do not have any Twitter account, someone can use your name and speak on your behalf, and that happened for Pierrick Fabrigo. And once that has started, it's very difficult to stop it, even from a legal point of view. We can only open an account which is being certified as a true user. So just I wanted to mention that, really, that's quite important. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you, but I cannot see anything, unfortunately. Okay, that's it. Do you want to see the audience? Or do you want to see the speakers? I want to see the speakers, actually, please. Okay, delighted to meet you. So, my name is Marion. Your name is Marion Delas, who is a triathlete who will have a race on Sunday. Who is also sponsored by a cycling company. She's studying at university, and she's a high-level athlete. And she's using also the social network. She has a blog, which is very popular. So I think I've introduced yourself quite well, haven't I? So, well, actually, could you please tell us about your blog and the way you use social networks? Well, I set up this blog a couple of years ago, and at that time, a couple of years ago, lots of people were setting up blogs to share their experiences. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Yes, okay. And therefore, I told to myself, why shouldn't I do that? I am practicing extreme sports, but I couldn't find all the relevant information pertaining to these practices, the kind of equipment I needed, where to prepare. So it was quite interesting to share about these different of experiences and to interact with people. And further to this, I created also a Facebook page and Instagram account to be present. I also wanted to be present and to communicate on all social networks. So I think you use social networks rather differently than the professional footballers. It is an entire part of your trade, so to speak. I don't know if you have another, you are a high-level athlete, but like many high-level athletes, you also work to have an income. So therefore, you do use those social networks so as to promote your sporting activity. And this is completely different. Hello, Marion. I think we met and we connected on the social network. You can actually share me and connect on Patrick Montel officiel, and I would be very happy to connect with you if you want to do so. But to come back to Twitter, that has nothing to do with blogs. Blog for me is very important. It is instrumental in managing the career of an athlete and the athletes who actually convey their passions either in writing, through different thoughts, video, etc., different means. That is very important. It is essential. It is an addition to the work we do as journalists, and we do need that. Really, it is very important. But I do refuse to compare this kind of work with 144 characters in Twitter, which to me, once again, actually reflect nothingness, emptiness, or insults sometimes. So I quite agree with what Patrick just said. The blog is a personal page. That is my trade. I tell about my experience. The goal here is to convey what I do, my experiences. On that blog, I was able to convey what I did, and I questioned also myself. So I shared on the blog different things, and
I am picking up on studies again. This blog allows me to pass on my reconversion, maybe more accurate data, more specific data. Some of the aspects of journalism, oh, you're a blogger, they come and look at your events, they're interested in what you're doing. These are very different things. People who come and talk about their experience as an athlete on a blog with their own words. And then there's a journalist who picks up on the information and very differently does something else with it. Hello, good evening. A question for everybody, particularly to the two journalists from France Television, concerning the way that the content is used, the answers are used from the internet users and spectators and other Twitter users, given communication, people who communicate through these means. First, to the journalists of France Television, maybe you're going to contradict me, but in terms of athletics, I feel that you used much more content that was published, particularly on blogs, the answers and the comments. A lot of questions and requests were sent out over the throughout the program or broadcast, and yet now I feel that there is a paradox that digital content of France Television with your own content, like on Snapchat and other things, and in parallel with that, the interaction is that there is less interaction on air. That's a very interesting comment. I agree with you. But I think that it's a lack of coordination, maybe with the service that Mathilde is part of. Mathilde was in London with us. She looked after all of the digital aspect. She did these stories that we talked about. Once or twice we had an opportunity of working together, but it was very, very one-off because she was very taken with her work and I was with mine. And I had a very personal approach to all of this, completely independently from Mathilde's. And this approach I saw in all of this, Twitter, Facebook and all that, I saw a wonderful way of speaking with people and interacting with them. And as you see it, I'm here for that today, to talk with people, to interact, give my opinion, but also to hear the opinion of others. And this is fabulous to imagine. During the comments, as I'm commenting, I have my tablet beside me, and no one else does it for me. As I'm commenting, I look at what's going on, I interact. And I think that I was very disappointed. At the beginning, I was very enthusiastic. And then I realized that it was either just questions that were very basic. What does RN mean? MPN, best world performance. And these questions keep coming up. Once you've answered, you don't need to answer constantly the same thing. Or else it was personal attacks or criticism, sometimes compliments. You're wonderful. Anonymous 38 thinks that I'm great. You're not going to say that alive. And when Anonymous 38, you are an asshole or something like that. You're not going to pass it on live. And I just felt that there was a breakdown in communication with it. And I felt the only moment when I really exchanged productive online, on air, and which was worth me looking at my tablet, is when we look at very targeted communities. For instance, the 50 kilometers marathon, 4.5 hours of walking. The guy is really involved in his walking, so he's going to ask questions that are very interesting because it's his passion. So you want to talk to someone who's walking for 50 kilometers. You want to talk to the consultant next door because you're going to make things move forward and you have questions to ask. It's the same thing for a marathon. But as for the large-scale audience, I didn't find what it was all about. Maybe Mathilde, you have simpler, more efficient ways of answering that question. Yeah, I'm going to answer briefly. Yes, in the most recent events, I was in charge of social network, comments with sport. Before we used to talk about tweets on air, and then with the questions, with the hashtags, we used to pass them on to the people who could answer. Snapchat and other things. Everybody, it depends on when I answer when I hold the Snapchat of France Télé, I answer every single question that comes up. I answer all the questions that are asked. Everything that comes up, I answer it. What's good is that it gives the idea of proximity with people, like they feel close to the large-scale France TV Sport media. It's much more accessible to ask questions of us through that system. That is the, we do have live Facebook events where people are asking the comments, the questions, we look at them and we ask them to the athlete, and it generally can give a very interesting interaction. To complete what Mathilde said, and I agree with it, live it's very difficult to do it, so I try to do it best, but I'm not so good. I mainly answer, give other people around me the opportunity to answer, and it's true. Once I'm no longer on air, I do answer everybody personally, except for those that insult me because I'm not interested. But I do, on Facebook or Twitter, I do try to answer everybody who comments, because it is basic politeness. As long as people have done it in a polite way. Nothing to answer to people who insult you, but I can do it in the heat of the moment. You have, on the Tour de France, you have a system, don't you, to pass on tweets? That system doesn't exist for athletics. If it existed for athletics, if we had some kind of community manager who selected tweets, maybe it would be worth answering. Can you answer what that system is? The way of answering people? For those who have Snapchat, you know, there's a photo of the screenshot. What is it? Basic questions. They answer a question and I answer it, yes. It takes a lot of time. Sandy and Beatrice, who were with me in London, saw the time I took to answer all of this. 250 to 300 people ask questions. They ask several per day. It takes time. It's interesting. Then the question back there. It's a reaction, then a remark. I want to come back to something that Monsieur Montel said earlier. He said about Twitter that it was fairly empty in terms of content in sport, particularly in sport. In terms of information overall. And I think what is important to put Twitter back into its context. Twitter was never intended as a media in the traditional sense of the term. Like when you're watching a television channel or an informational source. It's a social media that links people together, not to be an information channel like we understand it today. So to criticize Twitter for its lack of content, of course that's true, but it doesn't have much interest insofar as it's not meant to add to the issues raised. Twitter is invaded by journalists, sports journalism, by a lot of people who use Twitter as a tool, as a work tool, more than as a real social media. I do agree with you. So I correct what I've just said. Yes, indeed. That's maybe the criticism that I want to make. It is to should be talking actually to my colleagues who use sports tweets for important things in terms of information. It's not a good information source. Once you consider that Twitter is just a tool for linking people together, everybody can say what they want to say. The problem is when we pick up on that information and use it as a source of information, important source of information. And a number of programs today just pick up on tweets. So-and-so said this, so-and-so said that. And that's where I observe the emptiness of the content. When you pick up on a tweet and make it into a major information point, you are overlooking other information that maybe deserves to be developed better. And that's the criticism that I'm making, but it's valid for Twitter, but for continual non-stop information today, where we use information or highlight information that I feel does not deserve it. So when people want to create, to link in with other people because they're disconnected from them, I understand the need. What I just can't understand, and I say it clearly, is the people who use Twitter to insult people without knowing them. That bothers me. That really bothers me, because I would never allow myself to insult someone I didn't know. So to insult someone when you've never seen them, don't know who it is, even that's something that's inconceivable. Yes, of course, the emptiness, you can share emptiness with people, but you can't turn it into information. Any other questions? My question will be for Mathilde. Given Snapchat and Instagram that you talked about, for France Télé, you are a young journalist. Do other colleagues follow you in all what that you do? Do they agree with you, or are they actually do they hold back from using these social media in the way you do? It took time to get onto it, but everybody's getting onto it. There's been Snapchat training within the editorial board for people who are 35, 40 years old. So we don't necessarily have the same ways of using Snapchat. If you follow France TV Sport on these networks, I hope you do. There are two different methods. There is the method of those who manage it well. It's fairly conventional. Then I use smileys and expressions, young people's expressions. Sometimes my leaders, my bosses criticize me for it, but all the generations can use it, are beginning to use these networks. So it's a good way of attracting a younger audience that maybe watches TV on the television, on their telephones, the mobile telephones, watches programs on the mobile telephones. In the same line of thought, given social networks and following what we were saying earlier, there is a confusion between the different social media. The target of linking people, yes, but there is also Twitter has press users. People use Twitter as a press relay medium, and people use it like that. Athletes who are self-employed, for instance, who use. There is only advertising on her Instagram account. It's only brand promotion. That's what she needs to do in order to earn money. Otherwise, she can't earn money. The confusion. So we mustn't confuse the use of Twitter or Instagram. The absence of clear link between social media and the uses we make of them creates this confusion, makes it more complicated for journalists or representative of organizations and athletes. Do I put my family on my social networks or not? And so you need to use certain codes, certain ways, and that's going to change as you go through and use the different networks differently. We have two representatives of sports, triathlete and football. I may be wrong, but from the outside it looks to me like football, men's and women's football, is becoming, a lot of is asked of the players. And I do wonder to what extent being a good communicator can be a criteria for clubs to select players and a criteria for having a high-level sports career. To what extent, beyond being good in football or another sport, you're also asked, used to be asked as well to be good in as a friend to the other players, but now it's communications, it's journalism, it's brand representation. All of these things are important. I think it's interesting to compare triathlete competition with footballers. A lot of questions. There's a lot of weight on the shoulders of these people. The increase of TV rights is an issue. Triathlete sports is much less professionalized. Not so much, we don't see much of it on television, and at the same time, in order to pay for all the material equipment needed to travel, you need sponsors. So you need to be able to promote oneself as with an identity. How do you do it to find announcer sponsors? And what proportion does communication take up in the job that you play? That's for me, I guess. I'm quite keen to answer this question. I was talking to a brand who was explaining to me that what we need today, it's not good performance, but someone who can represent us properly. Sports and scoring, and a champion isn't just required to have achievements, performance. Profitability is also a major issue. Someone has sponsors and brands and media exposure, generating values, representing a team, a nation, a brand. A high-level sports person is always representing somebody or something. As far as I'm concerned, it's a job, and it's not a public job, it's a private job, so with its constraints and its requirements. Some people take to this automatically, take to this easily and naturally. And I do believe that as progressively we evolve throughout the media and social networks and everything that happens online, I think pro athletes, particularly in football, they need to be trained in communication. They have managers who help them with it. Triathlete sports is not so well known, and a lot of us have trouble finding sponsors compared to other sports. But they have less coverage, they provide less profitability. The enjoyment of the sports is quite simple. If we don't publish anything, you don't exist. If you don't publish on the social media, you don't exist. If you want sponsors, if you want people who take account of him, you need to make use of media, social media. I don't really know if I answer your question, but yeah. If a sports person has a downtime in sports, then they can fill it in with social media. She's not speaking loud enough for me to hear her. Somebody who is even a successful football player and who has played football to a high level and then gone on to sign contracts for brand representation. Some players don't want to do any of that, but others, it depends on the person. In football, it's not the same needs. Nike, Adidas oblige players to wear certain brands, and they have to communicate in that way. We could even go further and talk about clubs that maybe will recruit players and sports and athletes, not just for their sports performance, but also for their communications capacity skills. Someone who is good in communication will get a job, get a contract easier. In cycling, if there are two cyclists, if one of them is good on the social networks and can bring lots of journalists to the bus, there'd be a greater chance of getting the contract than someone who doesn't have that same skill, and that's going to increasingly be the case. What I'm bothered by in whatever we've been saying is that we're talking about money, we're talking about communication, we're not talking about the quality of the sports performance, quality of the show. We don't go to, when we go to see a football match, we don't watch communication, we watch football. Nicolas was saying that he does communication. I'd like to see him 90 minutes on the field at his level. I think we're talking about too much about money and not. We're spectators. We go to see a show. We hope to see a show. And as for communications, talking to Monsieur Montel, I'm not a communicator, but those who are on TV, too much talking, constant talking. Personally, when I watch a football match, I cut the sound because the comments are hopeless, are empty, devoid of interest. When you follow a team, it's so sad to hear what's being said. I was watching a team after the France-Belarus match, and only one spoke correctly. Journalists were empty, they didn't talk about the game. Only Olivier Rouillet is the only one who talked about the game, and I think that's very sad. I wanted to add that, unfortunately, I cannot promise victory, I cannot promise a good show, whereas we can promise other things, to communicate in different way, to tell stories about the game. That's why in communication we don't talk about the sports performance so much, because we can't guarantee what's going to happen. That's simply the fact. Yet we have to continue communicating. We can't allow, even if the match is no good, we can't not say something. We need to put words on what's been done.
Yeah, sure. I can't talk on behalf of my team. They don't have soccer rights, so they have to kind of add a bit of decoration, what we call space management. But you, the person who decided to watch that channel at that time of night, you could have watched Verdi on the Culture channel or Arte, but To come back to cycling, you have an amazing chance in cycling, which is that you are the only sport, to my knowledge, along with sailing, with quotes of brands all the time, including in broadcasts. In Formula One, it's the make of car, but in fact the cycling teams get advertising all the time by the name of their team, which is that of a company, nothing to do with cycling. And what I'm concerned about is that by being ever more demanding of the athlete, they are forced into crossing a red line. And you were talking about the need for PR, being present in social media, and when you're choosing, you'll choose the better guy with a better PR, where perhaps the sponsor is doing more to sell his brand. And we're going to be asking them to do something else other than pedal or manage the strategy of their race. I'm not suggesting anything on your part in that respect, but if you look at doping behavior, come from the fact that racers are not necessarily able to deliver what is expected of them, and since there is a contract of employment with certain obligation of results, they sometimes end up crossing a red line. So as we were saying earlier on soccer players, what is our expectation, as the gentleman said, is to play soccer. We are not expecting them to sell shoes or be relevant or on current affairs. We basically want someone who can play football well, and that is the same for any other athlete. A lot is asked of them. These people are aged between 20 and 30, sometimes more 20 than 30. Not everybody is Mbappe. He is 18 and can make sense when talking into the camera, be relevant, engaging, but not everybody can do that. And I think that we need to bear that in mind, both us as media, but also our sponsors. That is why I am in a job, because I work for the team, not for the sponsor, and that is to free up the racers. When they're on the tour, we concentrate on recovery so they can be in top form, and that is why I'm there to, not for them, so they don't have to think about media. I select media at the finish line. I take them to the set, remind them about what went on in the morning. They don't necessarily know who won or how their colleagues performed, so I brief them, and then they're to give a few opportunities for tweeting, because they will be too wiped out to think about what to tweet. And having cycled for 200 kilometers, they need a bit of help. So we're there to assist them and facilitate connection. That was that photo of the Marseille jersey and the sponsor's jersey. There was something there. Yes, but this is rather more of a fun image. I'd call that advertising, says Patrick Montel. Well, that wasn't really advertising. He was just very happy. We did it for him. He thanked us in his interviews because we had got the jersey for him, and it had good impact for us. Well, on the Tour de France, 700,000 journalists every day from around the world, 700 or 1,000 journalists, and there are some amazing stories like in Marion's team. A lot of buzz at the start of the tour because there was the youngest rider in the Tour de France who had celebrating his 22nd birthday on the day of the time trial. So these are excellent. So it was good advertising for us and also for the media because this was a good story, a little different from just summarising the stage and talking to the yellow jersey. This evening, Patrick said for the first time, in my knowledge since the first day, was the word doping. Or gazelle, somebody mentioned.
Justement, peut-être, mais quelle pudeur de gazelle pour en parler.
People have been very modest in not talking about this issue, whereas viewers have struggled to engage with these outstanding performances, which some then becomes revealed as a cheating. And so when the facts are out, what happens? We've seen in cycling, I follow Tour de France, and there are years where I watched the most. It was all the champions were disqualified, there were rumours, and then you get people like Rasmussen, and at the end of the day everybody says there's rumour in the pack, and the journalists and even the viewers, even before the days of social media. And there was a lot of talk about smoothing the image of the athletes, these nice stories, to tell these nice stories. Journalists are not there to tell nice stories, but to report. And I agree with you, says Patrick Montel. The problem is that today, legally, without proof, you cannot allege anything because you will have libel suit, as will your company, so you have to be very careful about what you say, even if you have serious doubts, as has sometimes been the case. In instances we are found to be true. Secondly, we are in this logic which I find very bothersome, which is not to know whether the guy is being doped, but whether he will be caught or not. And this means that basically the guy who isn't caught is something of a hero. And that is one. And the third thing which bothers me, which is nothing to do with false modesty, I had a bitter experience when I complained about Neymar. I've got nothing against the guy, he's an amazing footballer, but I thought it was indecent to talk about 200 million euro for a player transfer. And it was a rant, and some of people in the general public said about players and about those who are doped, shut up, let us dream. Sorry, so I was breaking the dream, and that was what I was accused of. But we want to be sitting on our couch and enjoy watching a show. We don't care if there's this cheating, and so this hypocrisy is something which we get caught up in. We know things, but we cannot prove them, and so we keep quiet, and at the same time we are facing up with people who don't actually want to know. And this is a very uncomfortable situation to be in. I shouldn't say so, but I say things, I call them as I see them. Or no modesty, or as you said, French is extremely rich as a language, and there's an adjective which can allow us to get out with honor, which is the word stupefying, which also has the, you can say something is stupefying, and you might be talking about stupefactants and rather than stupefaction. Any other questions? Yes, stupefying could be with a narcotic undertone, obviously. So, I think to wrap up, and I'm wondering about the relationship between sports journalists. We cannot put them all in the same bag. There are big differences between sports. Soccer obviously is to the fore, and the relationships are different in different sports. Could you say a little more about that, your view of that? And what I see in soccer is that we have people who are in judgment, very aggressive vocabulary, journalists towards soccer players. Some programs that say this player's crap, and so on. And these are people who don't know how to play football who are saying that the others are crap. There's judgment, and they're criticised, and journalists should be establishing relationships to have good contacts. So could you tell us more about that and how this happens in other worlds apart from soccer? So back to money, I'm afraid, because money is what screws everything up. When I began many years ago, they were my friends. The athletes were my friends. For many of them, even top sportsmen and women, I could have even gone on holiday with them, and we had the same leisure activities, and roughly, in terms of purchasing power, I probably had about the same income. But today, there's of course a huge gap, an abyss, and we now have nothing in common with the hyper-professionalization and contributions from a number of agents and PR organizations that have erected barriers such that very few sports personalities can really say they are friends with people. Journalists can be friends with people who earn 100, 1,000 times what they earn. Usain Bolt is a wonderful guy, but there's no way you can be his pal. No sports journalist can be friends with Neymar. But Marion here, who is patient, we can be friends with, which is great. Why can we be friends with her? Because she isn't living from her sport. She is an enthusiast for her sport, and her sport does not suffer, as it were, from huge media coverage. So perhaps just her mum will talk about her and a couple of local journalists, but she will be impassioned by it because it is a passion for her. She's a true amateur, and there is not any monetary interest in that. And I don't know Marion, but I know I could go on holiday with her. That's no problem. And in fact, I think I'd be very happy to go on holiday with her. Which is, well, my idea of a joke. So what I'm trying to say is that hyper-professionalism has spoiled relationships between journalists and athletes, and this gap has opened up. And perhaps Mathilde, who is much younger than me and much more optimistic, might think that she has very high-level friends who are athletes. Could you tell us, Mathilde? Well, I started being a journalist when I was 14, and I decided to. I'm quite a cycling fan, and we had media contacts. Communication was a little more controlled, but for amateur races, it's much more of a zoo, and I really enjoy riding there and reporting on that, because then I can get in contact with tomorrow's champions. And ever since I was a kid, I've grown up at the same time as champions who are now on the TV, winning stages of the Tour de France, and that was a kind of tactic on my part because I'm still very much a follower of amateur races, because I know that later on when I'm going to be on the Tour de France, I'm going to get interviews with these people more easily, because they remember that I was at some amateur local race with 3 spectators in the rain, and I was there with my camera when I was 18. So that will apply perhaps more than in other sports with which I'm not familiar. And so I'd have to fight my way through PR agents. We are not there to erect barriers, but our aim is to facilitate links between the media and athletes, and today sportsmen and women are very suspicious of journalists, and if I don't go to my riders and say you've got to communicate, then we won't get any coverage. They will not have an interview. They don't have time, don't see the benefit, and they're increasingly afraid of journalists. Whereas if I play my cards right, well, they'll have to, for one thing, and journalists then thank us to say that you've helped us. And I didn't wake up with a vocation to harass journalists. That's really not how it went down. We are here because we love sports, and perhaps we'd be sometimes more oriented PR in our careers, but we live because of the sponsors, and our sponsors need impact media outcomes. So journalists also require athletes, and there's this kind of interdependency, and we do our best to work hand in hand, and while we may agree with everything, our aim is to work together. Thank you. So, Patrick Montel, what you said just now, you are against sponsors and money in the world of sport, but that allows, as Marion has said, to provide an income for semi-professional amateurs who are committed to the sport, and you compare the top players with these semi-professionals. What do you think about these two levels? As I said just now, today I am kind of stepping back from all that. I understand Marion and her concerns. She's keen to make a living from sport and needs external financial support, and I don't want to criticize her for that, but what I'm saying at the twilight of my career is to say, what is sport about? What is it for? Is it a business? Is it for brands to sell more shoes and shirts, or is it for you to feel healthy and live longer? And that is my concern today. Perhaps this is a rather old-fashioned struggle, but that is what I'm interested in today. I want to develop values that highlight the values of sport, which mean that people will feel better. We have the fact that we are more sedentary, we have obesity, we have extremely serious factors. We need to be aware that we are not a sports playing nation. Kids in the high school do not really play sports, so there are major concerns in terms of public health. As a journalist, I feel concerned by that. Perhaps that's rather old-fashioned of me, but I feel disconnected from top-level sports. Okay, performance is all very well and good. Marion will, I hope, achieve great success, and that she'll be happy with that. But the main thing is to feel fulfilled and find the right pace and be happy. Sports today has everything it takes to achieve that, provided that the rest can be handled. I've got nothing against sponsors, but they mustn't take up all the room. Money shouldn't be the only incentive. Sports players should be involved because they believe in it in terms of well-being, and today that's where I'm at, and I believe there are many dangers of drifting, and each time I realise that it goes back to cash, and I don't buy into that today. At least one person agrees with me. Well, I would like to come back on that. Sport requires money, and I think that professionals, brands, communicate well. And performance is the first criterion. They then, of course, need to be able to communicate well if they want to be able to monetize well through sponsoring. But I think that this person must be an enthusiast first and foremost to persevere in training. They're not there just to make a pile of money. I want people to experience great adventures, endeavors, and I also want to be someone who feels fulfilled. I'm not after just money. And the relationship with money is determined by human factors. If someone does more sponsorship, the question is also, will the sports performance accompany that? These two issues are related. Money does not directly damage your health. Thank you. I think that we're going to close with that. Thank you for all of you, to the speakers, and to the various professionals who have been with us, and thank you for sharing their experience, and enjoy the rest of your evening.